A third major ethical argument in favour of legalising voluntary active euthanasia is that the current law is hypocritical. The argument runs that the law in most countries prohibits doctors from giving lethal injections or writing lethal prescriptions, but allows doctors to shorten life in at least 3 ways that are ethically equivalent to euthanasia or assisting suicide. The law, firstly, allows doctors to administer palliative drugs to a dying patient in order to alleviate pain, even if the doctor foresees that the drugs will hasten the patient's death. The law, secondly, allows doctors to withdraw life-prolonging treatment from patients, even though the doctor foresees that the patient will, as a result, die sooner. And thirdly, the law allows, indeed requires, doctors to respect a patient's refusal of treatment, even though the doctor foresees that the patient will die sooner. And it's argued that foreseeably hastening death is ethically the same as intentionally hastening death, and that it's therefore hypocritical for the law to allow doctors to shorten life in these 3 ways, while prohibiting them from performing voluntary active euthanasia or assisting suicide. How might euthanasia opponents reply? They could reply that there is an ethical distinction between intending to hasten death and merely foreseeing the hastening of death. They could defend the principle of double effect, a principle which has long been accepted in professional medical ethics, and which we touched on in our segment on the value of human life. What is double effect? The principle holds that if our conduct will produce a good effect and a bad effect, if we intend the good effect and not the bad effect, and if the bad effect is not a means to the good effect, and if we have a sufficiently serious reason for allowing the bad effect, then we act ethically. Applying this principle to the end of life, while it's always unethical for a doctor to intend to bring about a patient's death, it may be ethical for the doctor to administer drugs to ease pain, or to withdraw life-prolonging treatment, or to respect the patient's refusal of treatment, merely foreseeing the shortening of life. For example, the doctor who administers morphine to ease the pain of a dying patient, merely foreseeing the hastening of death, acts ethically. The doctor intends the good effect, pain relief, not the bad effect, the shortening of life. The bad effect is not a means to the good. The relief of pain is not caused by the shortening of life. And the doctor has a sufficiently serious reason to allow the bad effect, namely easing the pain of a patient who is near death. This ethical distinction between intention and foresight was endorsed by the US Supreme Court in rejecting a challenge to laws against physician-assisted suicide. Chief Justice Rehnquist, delivering the judgment of the court, noted that the distinction between assisting suicide and withdrawing life-sustaining treatment was a distinction widely recognized and endorsed in the medical profession and in the law, and was important, logical, and rational. The distinction, he added, reflected fundamental legal principles of causation and intent. When a patient dies after refusing treatment, he explained, the patient dies from an underlying fatal disease. But if a patient ingests lethal medication, he is killed by that medication. The law, said Chief Justice Rehnquist, had long used the actor's intent to distinguish between 2 acts with the same result. The law, he explained, distinguishes actions taken because of a given end from actions taken in spite of their unintended but foreseen consequences. Euthanasia supporters could point out that many bioethicists and lawyers reject the principle of double effect and see no ethical difference between intended and foreseen consequences. They could also object that it's impossible to get inside a doctor's head to know whether the doctor intended or merely foresaw the hastening of death. One expert committee on euthanasia, which defended double effect, rejected this objection, observing that juries are asked every day to assess intention in all sorts of cases, and could do so in respect of double effect if in a particular instance there was any reason to suspect that the doctor's primary intention was to kill the patient rather than to relieve pain and suffering. Finally, it's relevant to note that the Dutch, the pioneers of voluntary active euthanasia, agree that euthanasia involves the intentional and not merely the foreseen shortening of life.